Well, good morning. I'm going to show you today how I use a spindle roughing gouge. What we refer to as a spindle roughing gouge is a deep U-shaped tool that, as you can see, a spindle gouge is much flatter, and a bowl gouge, although fairly deep, is much narrower and thicker. When I first learned to use the roughing gouge, the tool was held horizontally, roughly on the center line, and used pretty much like what we call a scraper today. And you would take little cuts, until you got it round. It helps if you turn the flute in the direction you want to go, because it doesn't throw the shavings back in your face so much. Years later, I discovered what's called a bevel rubbing cut, and that is, I set the tool on the work, and as the work rotates into it, you lift the handle until it just starts to cut, which is right about there, and you turn the flute in the direction that you want to go. And you'll notice now it's producing more of a shaving. It doesn't sound like it's bouncing the tool as much. And I kind of control where the shavings go. The advantage of this cut over the scraping cut, on a scraping cut, the only control I have is how much I push in or pull out. And it's hard to get a perfectly trued cylinder. If I do the bevel rubbing cut, the control of the cut is by how much I lift the handle. So I can take off a very small amount and really control the shape. I can simply lift the handle farther and take a bigger amount. Or again, you can take the tiniest amount off. So I have a lot more control of the shape by doing that. Now, after doing that cut for a while, I developed what I call a push cut. It's a bevel rubbing cut, but what I'm doing is pushing straight in. I tilt the flute in the direction I want to go, and I can simply push it in until I don't see a shadow on the top, which means it's round, and then I just turn it off. It goes a little bit faster, but the main advantage of that cut is if I'm cutting a square shoulder on something, it doesn't tear the bark off, or if I was cutting a square block, it doesn't tear the corners. You can see that's a very clean cut. Now there's also what I call a right hand and a left hand skew. If you look at this area right here, I grind it fairly straight. That kind of matches my skew. So what that allows me to do is to use this. I don't know if you can see it from the camera position, but I have little minor tool marks all the way down there from feeding the tool fairly fast and using the rounded portion of the tool. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit. Okay, what I'm going to do is show you how I do the left and right hand skew cuts. I'm using an area just a third of the way up from the bottom, just like you would a skew. And as you can see, I get nice little shavings. It allows me to clean up all the tool marks. I can use it left-hand and right-handed. And you can even use it upside down, if I can keep my head out of the shot. So once you have an area that's dull, you can turn it over and actually use the bottom, lower third. Also, a very handy feature of having these long straight edges is the corner is fairly sharp. So as long as I have the tool anchored, I can use it somewhat like you would a parting tool to rough out a tenon. So it's a real universal tool for getting everything cleaned up into the shape you want. You know, rough it out to size, use the skew portion to clean it up. Okay, what I'm going to do now is show you how I would turn a little stool leg using the rough out gouge primarily to get everything close, and how I would cut a square corner on there. One of the downsides of using the rough out gouge is if you're not careful, you can tear up the corner. when you're trying to do a square cut. And of course this one didn't tear up very bad, a little chip out right there, pretty good. But that would leave the corner not very square, and you don't want to do that. I've read in magazines and things that you should put masking tape around the edge, and that prevents it from tearing out. Well, it doesn't. It looks nice, but it doesn't work. The best thing to keep them tearing out is that push cut that I talked about earlier. You can see how clean this is. There's no tear out on any of the corners. So I can sneak up very closely. A little bit out of square right there. If you use a parting tool right there, and I'll actually show you up here, you can see what the parting tool does on those corners. Tears them out really bad. So what I use is a skew, and I move to the right of the line a little bit, and I aim the left side of my bevel straight in. And I make a V-cut to give myself some clearance. Then I make another cut. And what I do is I sneak up on that line, and get it where I want it. And then I could go back and I could clean this off with a skew, or again I can use that lower shoulder of my parting tool and get down closer to the shape that I want. Now if I was going to put a foot on here, of course I would go in, make the cut for the foot, how shallow I want that. Spindle roughing gouge, and I cut down close. Again, I'm trying to keep the bottom anchored so I can't get a catch. Clean that up. Then I'll go back and clean up these areas and get the taper that I want. Now as you approach this, it's very important not to hit that shoulder. That'll jerk the tool down and you'll get a catch. So as I get to that area, I slow down, stop. I might even turn it over and work this area a little bit. So that gets my shape about the way I want it. I want this to be curved down a little bit. So I'm going to go with the skew and go a little farther. Make my V-cuts nice and clean. Now if you saw my skew video, you know what I'm doing as far as keeping the keep the heel, and I can butt right against that shoulder. You can see it doesn't go in. I'll make my final pass down through here. And then we'll just shape the foot the way I want it. Had to get rid of a little bit of excess there. And we'll take the corner off. Since I used a parting tool, that X section is real torn up. So I'll use the toe of the skew and come in here and clean up those tear out marks. And one final little pass to clean up that. And now we've got our table leg. You can see the line that goes through that caused me some problems. But I'd take a little bit more effort, clean it up a little bit nicer. But you can see now I've got a good square corner on there with no tear out. A lot of magazines call this a roughing gouge. So would you use it to rough out a bowl? I wouldn't. The problem is it's too easy to get this upper wing caught on there, and that jerks the tool over. And when that happens, it bends this tang or breaks the tool. You can see how thin that is compared to a bowl gouge. Now a bowl gouge is designed for this. It's a much better tool for it. So I simply wouldn't use my roughing gouge to rough out a bowl. It's not that it couldn't be done. An expert, a cutting edge is a cutting edge, and an expert can do it. But it's just not worth the risk when a bowl gouge is so much more effective.